Welcome back. This is part 2 of small group leader slash bridge group facilitator training. We ended the first video by talking about the necessity of active listening as you lead a group. And again, active listening is simply engaging what a person is saying by repeating back to them what you hear them saying. So for instance, another example of active listening would be, so what I hear you saying, Beth, is that you really like banana cream pie over vanilla cream pie. Using I language, you repeat back to the person what you hear them say. Now, speaking of I language, there's one more thing I want to talk about in regards to healthy group dynamics, in regards to engaging another person's conversation. Sometimes in a group, specifically when conversation gets heated, and most likely you will have these kind of conversations at times. They turn into tennis matches where, as people are talking back and forth to one another, they're not taking the time to absorb what another person is saying. So, for instance, it would be like Carl talking to Susie, and Carl is talking, and then Susie talks, and then Carl talks, and then Susie talks, and neither one of them are really hearing what the other person is saying. Two things happen when this type of conversation takes place. The first thing is, this kind of conversation can escalate to an unhealthy level, specifically if there is anger involved. The second thing is neither person is really heard. So the way you kind of dismantle this angry, contemptuous, conflicting conversation is by using I language. By teaching your group to say, Carl, what I hear you saying is this. I feel frustrated when I hear that. Now, if you notice, Susie was talking to Carl, and she used I language the entire time. She said, Carl, I hear you saying this. Carl, I feel frustrated when I hear that being said. If you noticed, she only used the word you once, and instead of projecting towards Carl, she was able to use I language and control herself and control her side of the conversation. So I encourage you to use I language in order to dismantle any unhealthy conversation, but also use I language to engage in conversation. So again, let's say that Susie said something that Carl is having a hard time understanding. Carl can say, Susie, I am having a hard time understanding what you're trying to say. I hear you saying blank. Is that correct? Now basically all he is doing in that example is using active listening and reflecting back to Susie what he is hearing her say. So again, I language is extremely important when it comes to leading a group in a healthy way. So now there are a few more things I want to talk about before we end part 2 of the small group leader bridge group facilitator training video. And that is this. When you're leading a small group, if you throw a question out there, be okay with silence. Throw the question out there, be okay with silence, because silence most likely means that the people are not disengaging. It means they are thinking. It means that they are turning over in their mind what the question is asking, or they're turning over in their mind what their answer most likely could be. So don't be afraid to throw a question out there and sit in silence. However, if you do throw a question out there and there's a long pause and people are trying to converse but they're having a hard time engaging or they're having a hard time conversing, use I language, use active listening, and possibly say something like this. Help me understand why I feel like we are having a hard time engaging this topic. Use I language, and you can also throw another question out there by saying, instead of saying the question like this, let me put it out there a different way. Instead of asking, could you see yourself in Paul's shoes in prison? Let me phrase the question this way. What do you think it would be like to go to prison and leave your family? Reframe the question, ask an additional question on top of using I language to draw your participants more into the conversation. Now there are 3 more things I want to cover. Affirm what a person says. If they say something positive, affirm them by saying, wow, Louise, that is a very good contribution to this conversation. Affirm them. Even if it's a difficult comment or a comment that really doesn't fit in, you can always affirm their participation by saying, Johnny, I am so glad you spoke up. I believe that's going to help us get to where we need to go. Also, extend your conversation. meaning that if person A says something, extend what person A says onto the rest of the group. So, for instance, if Louise speaks up and says something that's pretty insightful, turn to the rest of the group and say, what do you guys think about that? Do you agree or disagree with Louise? You may want to use that type of extending the conversation later in weeks 4, 5, and 6 once there's comfort or a comfort level established. If you use it in weeks 1 or 2 and there's not a comfort level established, Louise could feel exposed and vulnerable by what the other people in the group might say. And then finally, you have affirming and extending. Now you can include other people in the conversation. So for instance, if you have the silent type sitting over there being quiet, try to engage them by including them by saying, Sam, what do you have to say about that? And if Sam is still quiet and doesn't engage, leave Sam alone. But by trying to include him in the conversation, you're inviting him to become part of hopefully what is a healthy and life-changing conversation. So there you have it. Affirming, extending, and including are 3 additional ways that you can foster conversation within your group. Now, before ending this video, let me pause and review some of the things we've talked about. We've talked about the necessity of environment in your group, how environment leads to relationships, and how relationships lead to unspoken communal rules that will help your group establish community as time goes on. We've also talked about the necessity of active listening, how you repeat back to a person what they said in order to engage what they are saying. We talked about the importance of I language. We talked about how throwing a question out there and being okay with silence is a necessity, because silence means most likely that group participants are thinking about the question or thinking about their answers. We talked about affirming, extending, and including in regards to continuing the conversation. And then earlier on in the first video, we talked about 3 different types of people that can train wreck a group: the dominant type, the silent type, and the distractor type. And again, with the dominant type and the distractor type, set boundaries. With the silent type, do the necessary work outside of class to figure out why they're being silent. Is there a conflict going on in their lives that they're having trouble with? Are they afraid to speak up? Do they lack self-worth? With the silent people, this gives you an excellent opportunity to pastor them and to love them and to try to figure out what is going on outside of the group. Well, there you have it. My prayer for you is that as you have watched these 2 videos, that you feel even more equipped to be a small group leader or a bridge group facilitator. Please don't hesitate if you have any questions to contact Barron or Matt or any of the elders, as I'm sure they can help you out with questions you may have about small group leading and bridge group facilitating. And please know that it is my prayer that as you lead these groups, you know that you're doing more than leading a group. You're helping people understand the life-changing message of the gospel. Thank you.